Yeah, we've never actually had this kind of thing happen with Russians that we know.
Interfering
Yeah,
in
in
your
our
election. Well,
elections.
that is something that the Russians have done this before in Eastern Europe, and there's a kind of pattern to what they do, and part of it is investing money in people and sort of getting to own them, and that's why we want to see Donald Trump's income taxes. His own son in 2008, Donald Jr., said that we have a disproportionate amount of money coming from Russia into our business. So I think that's part of the way they have corrupted people or gotten people their hooks into people.
What would it take then for Trump to be defeated? Anything?
Well, I talk very privately to a lot of my colleagues in the Republican Party who are kind of very nervous about Donald Trump. They are not abandoning him because his base has more or less stayed with him. But, you know, if things like this health care bill continue, I think his base, enough of his base will see that he's not working for the people he said he was going to work for. And I think at a certain point, that combined with maybe further revelations about the Russia connection, that maybe we will see my Republican colleagues being much more independent.
So a lot of people are paying attention to the way that you grilled Betsy DeVos, that you grilled Jeff Sessions. People are already talking about the next election. Your name is being put forward as maybe somebody who might run for the Democratic nomination. Would you? Do you want to be president?
No, it's very flattering, but we can't get ahead of ourselves. We have a fight on health care right now.
That doesn't sound like a no.
No, I'm not going to do that. That's something I'm not going to do. How's that?
$1 billion infrastructure plan in his campaign and continued to mention it in the days after the election. We Democrats welcome the idea. One of my first conversations with the president after he was elected was about infrastructure. I said, you called for a $1 trillion infrastructure program. He said to me, at least that. And I said, sounds good to me. Let's work on it. We've made overtures to the White House saying we'd be willing to work with the president on infrastructure. I've said it to the president directly several times. Democrats have been pushing for new money for infrastructure for a very long time. We even put out our own proposal, a $1 trillion infrastructure plan, hoping it would spark a discussion. And we Democrats continue to welcome a serious and constructive dialogue on this issue. But unfortunately, the president continues to disappoint. We sent our plan several months ago, and we've heard nothing for those months. And now the president seems to be intent on pushing forward an infrastructure plan on his own, one with few details, that's mostly private sector driven, and that means tolls, and with minimum investment that would ignore huge sections of our infrastructure. The president doesn't seem to be talking to anyone but a few people in his inner circle. Some of them are financiers. Of course, they've been financing private sector infrastructure for a long time. But that's not the way we've worked here in America since Henry Clay, a former, quite a Republican, Mr. President. We didn't have any then, but he was a Whig, the predecessor party, and he came up with this idea of internal improvements. I'd remind my dear friend, the majority leader, he was from Kentucky, Clay, and internal improvements were supposed to connect what was then the East Coast with the far West, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, roads over the Appalachians. And ever since, we've had bipartisan support on the federal government building infrastructure and putting in the dollars for it. But not from President Trump, at least thus far. The president's plan is a recipe for Trump tolls from one end of America to the other. That's not what the American people are crying out for. They don't want more tolls. They want us to rebuild our crumbling water systems, bridges, schools, roads, broadband, not finance new toll roads. Unfortunately, the president surrounds himself with bankers and financiers. These are folks who used to work at investment banks, They look at infrastructure as an investment to be made by corporations in the private sector. But infrastructure has never been a business investment. Infrastructure has been something the government has invested in for decades and even centuries, because the benefits of infrastructure have great, what the economists call, Mr. President, externalities. The benefit for having a good highway is not just the people who use the highway, but if a factory locates nearby because it can get its goods there more frequently and quickly, that's a benefit. A road itself might not generate short-term profits, but a factory might locate nearby and bring jobs and economic vibrancy to an area. The private sector might not build high-speed internet all the way out to the house at the end of the road if there isn't a profit there, but our rural people are as entitled to high-speed internet as our people in urban areas, and I might add, there are large parts of my city, New York City, where that last mile isn't done because it's poorer residents and less profitable. So that's why there's always been the role of government to stimulate infrastructure investment, to provide support for necessary maintenance and construction which the private sector would ignore, to connect that house at the end of the road to high-speed internet so children living in it can learn, thrive, and compete in a global economy, benefits America, even if someone isn't making a huge profit immediately from the building of that broadband. Same with a highway, same with a bridge, same with water and sewer, same with a school with internet. So, bottom line, if the president wants to sit down with Democrats, of course we want to do it. But if he continues to take this path with a plan cooked up by Wall Street advisors, it won't succeed, or it will result in such small measure that it won't be effective. And again, I'd say to the president, you know, there's talk, I've read in the newspapers, they want to do this by reconciliation, no Democratic votes, just 52 Republican votes here in the Senate. The same problem they had with health care, the same problem they're having with tax reform will repeat itself with infrastructure if you don't do it in a bipartisan way. Our colleagues constantly remind us that Obamacare didn't work because it was done by one party. But now they're letting Trump lead them to do the same thing on just about every major issue. It's a formula for failure that President Trump is advocating. He hasn't been down here in Washington that long. It's up to our Republican colleagues here to teach him that working in a bipartisan way is the only way you can really get things done here. So my view, we need bipartisanship. But the president might not get, just remember, that many Republicans are very, very negative, initially at least, with a private sector-driven infrastructure bill because they represent rural areas. Here's what Republican Senator from Wyoming, Senator Barrasso, fine man, what has he said? Funding solutions, these are his words, not mine, Mr. President, funding solutions that involve public-private partnerships do not work for rural areas. And my friend, the Republican senator from West Virginia, has said, as a person who represents an almost rural state, I'm concerned about how we're going to be able to incent the private dollars to go to the less populated, less economically developed areas of our country because the investments are just as important. The bottom line is this. An investment bank infrastructure plan like the one the president is proposing is a sure loser here in Congress. A Goldman Sachs infrastructure plan just won't work, except for a few. It would turn over a public good to the whims of private finance, who won't build infrastructure where America needs it. They'll build it where they can make a buck. And that means tolls paid by working Americans and middle-class Americans. That means rural areas won't get the support they need. That means any project that can't generate user fees or taxes, like repairing our schools or water sewer systems, won't get done. There is no free lunch. When the private sector wants to finance infrastructure, that's our free enterprise system. They want to get repaid. But who's going to repay them? The average American, the truck driver who's scratching out a living, the salesman or woman who's scratching out a living, the family that's going on vacation and has to stop every 30 miles for another big toll, the small business that depends on roads to get the goods to and from that business location. If the president truly wants to rebuild our nation's infrastructure, he has to approach this issue in a bipartisan way. There are several Republicans who don't want the federal government to spend any more money on infrastructure, but the majority of senators on both parties probably do. The president needs to sit down with Democrats and work something out if he wants to get something done. He hasn't sat down with Democrats. He doesn't seem to want to. There are even reports that the president is considering doing infrastructure on reconciliation. That means just Republican votes. A huge mistake. Republicans have been tied in a knot here in Washington. The president has been tied here in a knot in Washington because he insists on going at it alone. You look at the entire Trump administration agenda. President Trump ran against both the Democratic and Republican establishments. A populist, if you will. But he has thrown his lot since he's become president with hard-right conservatives and is now pursuing an agenda entirely through the partisan process Republicans once decried. Health care, reconciliation. Taxes, the same. Now infrastructure. The one area, Mr. President, where we kept the president out of it, the appropriations process worked swimmingly well. Leader McConnell and I, Senators Cochran and Leahy, the House members got together in a bipartisan way and we worked it out. We each thought we had some victories. It worked. But I had to stand at this desk and tell our Republican colleagues, keep the president out of it because it'll bollocks everything up. Fortunately, they did. Maybe we can do that again. But I'd say to the president, Mr. President, you can spend your entire first-term agenda trying to jam through partisan bills. That would be a shame, because America needs to get moving again. And on infrastructure, this is an issue where we really have some common ground. That's why Senate Democrats put forward a $1 trillion infrastructure plan that would create millions of jobs and actually fix our crumbling roads and bridges, invest in every corner of America with particular attention to rural America. We stand ready and willing to work with the president on that plan or something similar that actually achieves what he promised on the campaign trail. Now, Mr. President, another matter, health care. According to reports, Republican senators were planning to use the state work period last week to rewrite their health care bill. Well, now we're back in session, and unfortunately, my friends on the other side of the aisle don't seem to be any closer to having a bill. If they do have one, they're hiding it and going down the same path as House Republicans, drafting a bill that will impact tens of millions in secret, no transparency, no committee hearings, no debate. Even with all this secrecy, more and more Republicans seem increasingly pessimistic about finding a Republican-only bill that can get 50 votes in the Senate. Over the weekend, the senior Republican senator from North Carolina, Senator Burr, said, quote, "I don't see a comprehensive health care plan this year," unquote. Just yesterday, Senator Thune, a member of the Republican leadership, said the Republicans may rush a health care bill to the floor before they know if it has the support of their caucus. Well, my friends on the other side of the aisle are learning how difficult it is to refigure our health care system under a process with only votes from one party, the so-called reconciliation process, and do it in a way that actually improves our health care, not devastates it, as the House bill would. So I hope my Republican friends will realize the only way we'll get votes necessary to pass a health care bill is to drop repeal and work with Democrats to improve our health care system, not to sabotage it. We stand ready and willing to work with our Republican colleagues to further stabilize the insurance markets, build on the progress we've made in health care. In fact, we're running out of time before the 2018 rates are locked in. Most insurance companies are saying they're raising rates because of the uncertainty that Republicans continue to inject in the market. The president has not come out permanently for cost sharing, which would reduce premiums and keep people in the market. They just sort of do it month at a time. And that's going to make the markets worse. And the public already, unfortunately, will blame those in charge, our Republican friends and the president, for the mess, as much as they would like to look past, as much as our colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to point fingers past. People want something done now. Don't want fingers of blame pointed back what happened 5 years ago or 8 years ago. We Democrats don't want to tear everything down and start over again. Let's keep all the progress. The 20 million more Americans insured, the kids who can stay on their parents' plan, the protection for folks with pre-existing conditions, and find ways to make even more progress on bringing down costs for consumers and improving the quality of care. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed.